Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a red wine from Jumilla. Jumilla is in Mediterranean southern Spain in Murcia. The winery here is regarded as one of the best producers in the Murcia region. Most of the wines from Jumilla are made from the Monastrell or Mourvedre grape variety. This, on the other hand, is a Garnacha, Grenache. The winery is owned by somebody called José Maria Vicente. It's been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather bought the winery and the vineyards in 1941. They'd originally been established by a French emigre who'd come to Spain and to this region, along with quite a number of Frenchmen at this stage when Phylloxera was ravaging France's vineyards. Phylloxera didn't actually come to Jumilla until the late 1980s, and that's why, I assume, is why José Maria and his father ended up having to replant all these vineyards in the late 80s, and they released the first of their new wines back in 1991. The estate has 174 hectares of vines, although given the arid climate that you have here, I would expect that the bush vines are planted quite widely spaced apart to enable each vine to make the most of the water in the earth surrounding it, so probably not very densely planted. The vineyards here are at altitudes of between 400 and 800 metres above sea level, so for cooling you have the influence of the nearby Mediterranean Sea and also the influence of altitude, as we're here in the foothills of the Sierra del Molar mountain. These particular vineyards are not the vineyards that were originally replanted in the late 80s. They're about 15 to 20 years old, so relatively young for the estate. The soil types here are free draining sand and stone, but almost invariably there is an underlying limestone that will act as a reservoir for water to allow the plants to see their way through the arid summers and high temperatures that they get here, up to 40 degrees quite most years. And the vineyards are certified as organic. The winemaking is done in a collection of stainless steel tanks and concrete vats. My understanding is some of the concrete vats are underground, which is quite traditional in Jumilla, I believe. Aging goes on in a combination of 500 litre demi-mude barrels, 5,000 litre foudre, so it's worth noting that foudre vary in size between individual barrels and also between regions as to what's defined as a foudre. Those are both made from, I presume, older French oak. I doubt there's much new oak in there. And some of the wine stays in concrete tanks, but in the barrels and the tanks is where they'll do malolactic conversion, and the wine ages for somewhere between 12 and 13 months before bottling. I should have said, one of the interesting aspects of the fermentation is that a third of the fruit is left as whole bunches. So you're keeping the stems of the pedicels for the grape bunches in there, providing a woody component. And also the fact that the berries are left whole means that it extends the fermentation, as later on during the process they open, revealing more sugar to the ferment, allowing it to continue for longer. Fermentation goes on for about 15 days and it's at about 30 degrees C, and that goes on with the indigenous yeasts found both in the vineyard and the winery. Sorry, I should have introduced the bottle here. This is Casa Castillo's El Molar 2021. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? I mean, classically, as far as the colour is concerned, as I say, the wine is 100% Garnacha, Grenache. There's quite a dark ruby red pigmentation, and yet the wine is not particularly deep. I can see straight through it, and I can see the stem of the glass very easily there. Swelling it, there are some quite apparent tears form really quite readily. The wine is 14.5% alcohol according to its label, so that, and given also its extract, giving it more weight, you'd expect that sort of to cling as it does. Let's see what the aromas are like, shall we? The aromas have rich, ripe fruit, and that fruit is a sort of a plum, dark black plum to damson to bullace note. There's a real depth and richness there, but it doesn't have a sort of a soft, juicy aspect. Instead, there's an overlaying of a sort of a savoury, almost sort of slight bacon fat note, and plenty of peppery spice. One might almost think that there are notes of new oak there, but as I say, I think the oak being used here is large and old, so I think the woody notes that I'm detecting on the nose are coming from those pedicels, from the stems that are left in the ferment. So let's taste. It's a big, rich, ripe wine. Full-bodied, structured. The structure is actually quite drying, but yet there's a lovely juiciness to the fruit. There's this core of, as I say, dark plum, as with the nose, dams and bullace, a very concentrated, ripe, heady note. But then there's also a lifted red fruit, almost like a sort of a raspberry jam note, and I'm detecting that on the edges of my tongue, where the really quite fresh acidity is enlivening it. Now, the alcohol at 14.5% is adding weight and roundness, and it's a rich wine. But it, as I say, it's stopped from being too ebullient. Again, there's that slight savoury bacon fat note, but here the tannins are really cutting in. They're very fine tannins. There's a peppery note to them, but there's also sort of a slightly bitter, drying note to them. They're not particularly astringent, but there is a sort of a drying capacity in there, and that is acting with the acidity. It's making me salivate. That's really appealing and would be a lovely accompaniment for sort of rich meat, rich dishes. The flavours are lasting well. You've got a lovely combination on the back palate of this sort of drying woody note, the savoury bacon note, and the rich fruit in the mid palate, and they're nicely combined there. And then the sort of the more lively red raspberry jam sort of notes on the edges of my tongue there. And I suspect with a bit of time, because this is quite a young wine, the more sort of attractive juicy fruit will open a bit more as the tannins soften. I hope not too much, because actually the spiciness of the tannins is really quite an important aspect of this style of wine. And I mean, I think this is a wine which has a future to it. You could very happily age it for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's got concentration, it's got complexity, it's got enough freshness to age. And in honesty, I think if I was trying this blind, I would be thinking that this was a pretty good quality wine from the Southern Rhone, sort of Châteauneuf du Pape, Gigondas, that sort of idea there. It really has some weight and richness and some really sort of classic pepperiness. That's a really enjoyable wine and a great surprise. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, do please hit the like button. Do please share this with your friends. Do follow us on YouTube. But most importantly, I hope you'll make the time to join us again really soon for another tasting. Goodbye now.